We are the
Carwells. I'm Emily.
And I'm Sarah. Welcome
to the Superhost Labs podcast.
Well, welcome back, everyone, to the Superhost Labs podcast. I am doing this one solo today as Emily is finally on her honeymoon after 3 years of waiting because of COVID, so we're giving her a break today. But today we have a very special guest, which probably most of you know, Michael Elefante. Hello, Michael.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Thanks for coming on. And for our listeners who don't know, Michael, why don't you introduce yourself and kind of give a quick background on who you are?
Yeah, for those who have seen me online, probably assume I'm just like a TikTok creator, an Airbnb person. But I grew up in North Carolina. I was a college athlete. And after my college career came to a halt, I didn't know what to do with myself. So was kind of seeking new passions and whatnot, and just jumped into a random tech sales job, which I very quickly learned to hate, the grind of the everyday 9 to 5. So fast forward a few years, just kind of learned about this aspect of financial freedom, which most financial freedom roads lead to some form of real estate investment. My wife and I had moved to Nashville in 2018, very quickly learned a lot more about short-term vacation rentals and Airbnb. And I just like to try and make simple calculations or investments. So I kind of dove into the number side of it, stripped the emotion out, and started cranking out all these different investment analysis on properties in Nashville. I'm like, if these numbers are right, why isn't everyone doing this? This is insane. So we finally built up the courage to get our first property. I sold my truck to furnish it because I didn't realize how much it would cost to furnish a 4-bedroom house in Nashville. But long story short, we got that first property, saw the cash flow come in, and the return on our investment, and we were hooked. Our goal was to hit financial freedom in like 5 to 10 years. We hit it in less than 12 months. And then in 16 months, we quit our jobs and traveled in a camper van for a year while managing our Airbnbs from our phone out in national parks, which is wild. And now we just settled in Greenville, South Carolina. My wife is expecting our first daughter. We just found out the gender last week in October. So that's a quick story of my life, but super excited to be here. Airbnb and short-term rentals has certainly changed my life. We're up to 6 properties now, still self-manage. It's extremely rewarding and challenging at times, which we can get into, but that's me.
That's incredible. Also, congratulations on becoming a dad. I've been following closely with all of your announcements, and all of them are either amazing or hilarious.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate it.
The TikTok of your wife's face, I was just like, she was not expecting that result.
No, it was a partial pure fear, but mostly we were actually very convinced that it was going to be a boy, just based on not just how we felt, but how the lady who did the ultrasound was acting when she said, "Look away." I was expecting like, oh, it's because it's obvious you can, see male parts on the screen. So I was convinced. That's why we were like, look so surprised in that video. But no, I'm super pumped to be a girl dad. I can't wait.
That's amazing. Well, congratulations. You guys are gonna be great parents, and that kid is walking into a not financially stressed childhood, which I'm sure will make their lives glorious. So, all right. So every episode we like to start with an Airbnb horror story. So I will let you tell one of yours because since you've been in it for a while, I'm sure you have a million. So.
Yeah, man, it's funny. We were talking about this before. I could tell a couple, but one that's just the most recent one was actually like a week ago. We had some guests check in and had very poor communication. And usually it happens when we lower prices to try and fill dates last minute, which is what happened here. It's in the mountains in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. They were 2.5 hours late checking out because they spent 2.5 hours washing their cars in the driveway. So it put us on hold, our cleaners on hold. Finally, they left. One of them left a wallet, came back and got it like 3 hours later. And then our cleaners got there late that night because they went to other properties in the meantime. And they sent photos. They said this is one of the worst properties we've ever walked into. And they've cleaned thousands of properties. So I'm like, great. So they sent photos of, and keep in mind, this is Gatlinburg, Tennessee, Smoky Mountains. There's black bears literally everywhere. When I set up these properties, I saw them every week. So they left a bowl of red meat outside by the grill, raw, just sitting there. A kitchen, like a foot-long knife on the driveway. They broke a chair inside. They left another dining chair outside in the rain. There was cardboard like glued or caked on the butcher block that we built for the coffee bar. There was noodles and food remnants and grease caked all over the base of the sink and pushed down the drain. The table was caked in grease. In the photos, you could see like crumbs of meat sticking to the table. So it was kind of like a common theme throughout the entire house. It was just trashed. And so we confronted the guests and said, hey, just letting you know, we're going to submit a damage claim. And typically this is what happens. They get upset and said, oh, well, that should all be included in the cleaning fee. And I'm like, are you on drugs? Why would that be included in the cleaning fee to literally clean up like caked grease and food off every inch of the house, like, or at least in the kitchen area? So we filed the damage claim. They said, of course, they're not going to pay it. So I'm waiting on Airbnb now. But they also left a 1-star across the board review. And all it said was, I don't like here. So
Yeah.
I called Airbnb and then they reviewed it and said it didn't violate their policies. So I was pissed because there's a direct correlation, right, between bad damage claim and negative review. I called another person. This is just weird. So if anyone's listening, I would call multiple times, talk to different reps, because I don't think the first rep really understood what I was talking about, or how, whatever. But the second person's like, oh, that definitely violates our policy. We'll remove it right away. So I'm like, that's crazy. But that's probably not the worst story we have, but the most recent one. Just some people are just not great.
Nasty. It's like, it feels like they don't have any empathy towards how they would feel if it was their property. It's like one of those things where they like, okay, if you were a cleaner, would you clean this up for the price that you paid for your cleaning fee? If you were an Airbnb host, would you not charge someone for leaving this property in the condition that you left it? Like, it just always surprises me. Like, I guess if you're thinking about staying at a hotel and the hotel has a gazillion rooms and a gazillion hotels in that chain, there's like less emotion maybe in their stay and there's like less respect overall for the property. But when you're dealing with Airbnb, you're dealing with like one person's baby. Like it's something so different. And so it just makes so much sense in my head for people to like come to this with a different set of like respect for somebody's, huge investment. But no, it like comes with so much entitlement sometimes. And I'm like, where does that come from? Who raised you?
Yep. I totally agree. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So did you not have a guest checking in the same day? Like you had some time to actually clean that property up?
Thank goodness. They actually went to clean it today. So it's been like 5 days. We didn't have any guests during the week. And then the cleaners had like a family emergency. So we're, empathetic toward that. We said, don't worry about it. Take care of it. And we'll just block their calendar. But yeah, we have a lot of same day turns, especially it's approaching summer. Almost every turn is going to be a same day turn. So that would have crushed us. We would have had to have the next guest check in late or hopefully not the next day, but it could have been a lot worse for sure.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. That is not fun at all.
But cleaning your cars. I have Ring camera footage cleaning their cars. They cleaned them more than once during their stay because I went back and looked. Cleaning their cars with like methodically cleaning. Meanwhile, there's just shit all in the driveway and in the house that they didn't bother. 2.5 hours, and they claim that a friend wasn't feeling well. That's why they were late checking out. I'm like, one, that's not an excuse anyway. Get the hell out of the house. But two, what are you doing? Like, you have time to clean the exterior of your car, but not pick up meat off the table.
Were they nice cars?
I mean, they're like your typical like hot rod type investments. There's probably like I don't know, just like have the spoilers on the back and stuff like that. So.
It just makes the story worse. But also, like, I've had that same experience with Airbnb claims where, like, all of a sudden you'll call Airbnb support and you'll get someone that just, like, absolutely will not budge. And then an hour later, you'll call back with the exact same situation and you'll get someone else and it'll get resolved in, like, 4 seconds flat. And I'm like, why? Why do I have to play this game?
The second person did it over the phone. They just said, oh, yeah, that definitely doesn't fit well. That has no substance to it. I don't like here. 1 stars across the board. She said, I'll remove it now. I was like, okay, great. Because usually we got to send to our team to review and blah, blah, blah. So I was like, I need to get your direct phone number. Call you every time.
Can I send you gift cards?
Yeah, right.
Well, one thing before I kind of dive into a couple of other questions we have for you here is, like, when you talked about selling your truck because you didn't understand how expensive it was going to be to furnish, house on your first property, I mean, we've helped so many new hosts bring properties to life, right? Like we started with design, and so we really got exposure to the mentality behind being a new host and how there's like some similarities that carry across the board when you are a new investor. And one of those is always cutting corners on furniture, not really truly understanding offering a quality experience. So if you were willing to sell your truck and you weren't willing to cut corners, like what was it about your experience that really like made you believe like from the get-go, hey, I'm going to offer a quality experience? Because I've seen your, your Airbnb listings and all of them are beautiful. And so it doesn't seem like you ever went through this phase of like, yep, that was my first one and we're going to ignore it. You started on a good foot.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think we went a little cheaper on our first one, but we didn't cut corners as far as like skipping at least like mid-level quality. I realized that very early on that first of all, if you're, forget ROI and the design piece, but if you buy really cheap stuff, it looks cheap in photos, it feels cheap when guests are there, and it's going to break faster. And anything that we've bought in the past that was cheap, I'm like, I knew we shouldn't have bought that because eventually we replace it within 6 months. And then it just becomes a headache and a pain. And then guests might leave bad reviews, and that's detrimental to your Airbnb listing because if the place feels cheap. But the ROI is definitely more important to talk about because something we realized in Nashville, which is where our first one was, is that we were not downtown. We were about 10, 12 minutes outside of downtown. So it was critical that we stood out on Airbnb search. We had to earn a higher click rate and a higher conversion rate because if we didn't, no one's going to care to stay 10 minutes outside when they could pay the same price or maybe a little bit more to stay, just walk to Broadway, which is the downtown strip in Nashville, if you're not familiar. So we paid to have like a big custom mural put in, and then we paid for more, furniture and kind of like accent walls throughout the house. Was our idea was if we can create like 1 to 3 key moments within that property that are going to be the first few photos of our listing to really earn a higher click rate, and then basically in someone's mind say, wow, I'm willing to pay more or pay the same, but I want to stay here over the neighbors because of this experience. So kind of like the Apple mindset, you're not selling the product, you're selling the user experience or how you feel about staying there. And if you can create any moment that's like an Instagram worthy moment, people are willing to book trips specifically for that. So we had that mural put in, and just quick story. I realized in Nashville, there's hundreds, if not thousands of murals across the city. And a lot of people don't know that, but a lot of them became famous when a few people with huge followings on Instagram a while back took photos in front of ones with giant wings on the side of a building. So I'm like, how can we bring that inside? Because I've seen lines of hundreds of people waiting on a Saturday morning to take that photo. If we could bring that moment inside into our living room, would that attract the key clientele, which is bachelorettes and special occasions who are willing to spend a lot more money than an ordinary weekend vacation to Nashville? So we ultimately did that, and thankfully it went well, and it's still going well. But yeah, that was like our first taste, and it definitely proved our early just preconception that design definitely.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're preaching to the choir there. I love it. I could not agree more on that front. I mean, it is one of those things that's a little less tangible, right? Like you can do pro formas all day, you can analyze Airbnb deals all day, but when it comes down to like the minutia of the design and everything inside it and how it makes you feel, that's definitely a harder sell to investors, especially investors who are who are coming from long-term rentals and they're transitioning into short-term rentals. I mean, everything has to be associated with a number, and design isn't. It just isn't. And so how do you sell that to brand new short-term rentals investors has been kind of the bane of our existence, especially at the beginning when we didn't understand it by doing it. We knew that it existed, but we hadn't dealt with investors who were allowing us to like push our creative freedom in these properties long enough to be able to be like, look, this is what they were expecting to make, and this is what they make now because we made it feel so much better. So that's, I mean, still to this day, it's the number one obstacle that we have to overcome in every single design call that we have with any design client. So it feels every time anyone like believes it, and I'm like, oh, why can't everyone just see it that way?
Yeah. Well, if you see, and the way I look at it too is, I get you guys probably do too. One of the most common questions I get asked from people online is, Airbnb's too saturated, or when will this city become too saturated? And I'm like, one, if you focus on the design and you're you manage it well, your pricing strategy is good, you have good reviews. Over time, if you're in that top 25% of performing properties, it won't matter because you're still going to be at the top of Airbnb search. You're still going to get those clicks and conversions. And in busy season, you're going to be able to charge more because everyone's going to get booked during busy season, but you can charge a premium. And now in the slow season, you're going to get booked at maybe you have the same price, but the neighbors won't get booked, right? So that's how you take a property that may do like 75 or 80,000 a year to one that does 120 to 150,000 a year, because just a slight change in average daily rate and occupancy can drastically change the forecast of the
Yeah,
property and the results that you get. So it is
1000%.
critical.
And it's like it's always the conversation that we use in any type of a pitch that we give to someone who's talking to us about design is like, look, a Red Roof Inn and a Marriott both have beds, they both have 4 walls, they both have a lobby, they both have a, vending machine, but why are they different? And if you can if you can truly, accept the fact that it is the interior and it is the experience that the interior design makes, then you can understand why, 2 properties side by side, one has good design, one has bad design, why you can charge more for the good design. But it's just overcoming that fear of them like understanding that it can't necessarily be penciled. Yeah,
Right.
and it's
Yeah,
getting more
exactly.
important. I mean, my DMs in the last 2 weeks have just been absolutely flooded by people being like, with this new Airbnb update, they're like, oh my gosh, the traffic just absolutely halted to my Airbnb. And I'm like, we're seeing the opposite. And I don't want to say I told you so, but I told you so.
Yeah, that's an amazing point to bring up. I'm glad you mentioned that because that also means it's extremely important. You have to like differentiate yourself because Airbnb is all about the unique experience now with their new search functionality. So I bet you guys feel really good about
I know.
it
I thought it
now.
was going to be just like, other hosts that were going to raise the competition level as time went on. And we were just going to like slowly have to invest more and more in our Airbnbs. And then Airbnb released that new update. And I was like, oh, it's here. Okay, so I have a couple of questions for you. I don't want to take too much time on this front end. I'm digressing because I will. How did your real estate journey start? I know that you talked about getting into tech sales and then really understanding financial freedom, but real estate has, a huge umbrella, and there's so many different ways that you can use real estate as a tool to reach financial freedom. So like, what whittled you down to kind of niche into short-term rentals?
The the thought that I didn't need like 50 doors, as most traditional real estate investors talk about it, to become financially free, like at $200 a door. When you understand the numbers with short-term rentals and the amount of monthly cash flow you can generate from a single property, depending on the size of the property, how well you do, and the location, of course, but it doesn't take but 1 to maybe 3 properties to set most people truly financially free. That was what made me really excited about it. I'd rather cash flow thousands of dollars a month on one property than kind of like slowly craft my way up to $200 a door to like 30 doors or something or whatever it is. So that was like the initial mindset and got me more excited about it. And the return on the investment, the cash on cash return, meaning the annual cash flow divided by the total amount of money you have to invest to start that property up, was 2 to like 5x on a conservative basis. In some cases, like 10 to 15x, what you would traditionally get on long-term rentals and the stock market. So it was really just came out of the numbers for me, like how hard is my money working for me? And that's what ultimately led to choosing short-term rentals. I will say the thing I regret not doing is starting earlier, because as a lot of people get into short-term rentals, you realize you don't have to buy a property to rent it. You can do rental arbitrage, which is, doing corporate lease, rent and re-rent, or co-hosting, or partnering with somebody. I think I was so focused on figuring out on my own how to buy that first property that it just slowed down the time it took me to get into that first one. And I think, as you'll probably contest to as well, I always say, like, the sooner you take action and start, the faster you're going to learn and find yourself into more cash flow. The longer you wait and think you need to know everything is just delays the process. So that was our journey into like that, how we got into short-term rentals and why we chose, the one that we did.
Yeah. It's interesting too to hear that it wasn't a lifestyle play, because it's like so many short-term rental investors that we talk to. I mean, yes, they like the cash flow upside and yes, they like, all the other things that you just mentioned, but there's always like this like lifestyle contingency of like, well, I also figured out how to like buy a vacation home that I could use whenever I wanted to use on top of all these other benefits.
Yeah, no, that's true. I mean, I think that's a huge bonus, but let's be honest. Like, I mean, if you're doing a second home loan, you should be using the property from time to time. But once you see the amount of money people will spend on a weekend for a property in any given location, I don't want to use that property. I'd rather go, I don't know, if I'm going there, I might use it, but like, why go use it when it's going to make me $3,000 this weekend? So it's really hard to do that sometimes. But yeah, no, don't get me wrong. That's a huge benefit of Airbnb that you don't get with really any other type of real estate investment is you could plop them at a beach, at a mountain, at a lake, in Nashville, Austin, Texas, wherever, and then you can have a vacation spot to go bounce around to. So the lifestyle flexibility that it can bring is a really cool aspect for sure.
Yeah. Well, and that's kind of a conversation that we're going through with investors in Superhost Labs too, is it's like, okay, if you truly want to passively invest and you don't have the time, the know-how, the team, the whatever else to bring these properties to life yourself, one of the most common questions we get is like, okay, well, can I use these properties? And we're like, okay, yes, if you want to rent them, but you've got to understand that you're splitting them with other people. And like, you can't have July 4th weekend at Lake of the Ozarks to yourself when it's one of the most profitable weekends of the entire year, because then it doesn't benefit anyone else. And so it's always that conversation of like, look, with this extra cash flow, by not staying at the property, you can go anywhere. Anywhere. You can go to Lake of the Ozarks and stay at another Airbnb. You can stay here. You can pay for this place, right? But still, you are having that extra cash flow that allows you the flexibility to travel wherever you want instead of being like hung up on wanting to travel to this one specific place that you own part of. So, yeah, it definitely is a shift in mindset there.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for sure. You said it perfectly.
So one of the other questions I have for you is, you lived in a van. We did the same thing. And we had, our list of reasons why we decided to live in a van for a period of time. And we'll probably honestly still go back to it. But was the van life a lifestyle play for you guys? Was it something that you wanted to do the entire time and it just kind of played well for you and like saving up money additionally? Or was it a very intentional thing that was like, okay, we want to stack as much cash as possible to reinvest into these properties?
Yeah, it was somewhat premeditated. My wife and I love to travel. She's been to like 27 countries or something. So she's very well traveled. I got the travel bug a few years ago. So I've always wanted to explore the rest of the US because there's so many different landscapes and like beautiful national parks, and every state is so different in these different microclimates. So like that's what fascinated me. I just truly wanted to like go explore. I never really thought I would be like a van person. I actually wanted to do a fifth wheel first, but then I realized you can't take a fifth wheel up a mountain and camp off grid. So that's what led us to ultimately the van. But it wasn't so much of a lifestyle. It was like, hey, let's quit our jobs and let's go travel as much as possible. And we couldn't really travel internationally, during 2021. It was still kind of weird with COVID. So I was like, hey, let's just do the US, be remote. And there was a lot of other benefits that came with it. We rented out our home at the time in Nashville, and we had this van. So our living expenses went way down, but we were making a lot of money with our cash flow from our properties. It also helped with my social media because it was kind of like, hey, look, we're actually living the life we preach of financial freedom. Like we don't have to do PTO or anything like that. We're not on anyone's clock. So it was kind of cool to kind of live that, full way through. And then the last part I'll mention is with the van, we were trying to see where we wanted to actually live and plant some roots before having kids. So we didn't know if we liked the East Coast where we grew up, or if we wanted to move back to Texas, or if we wanted to be out west in a different climate or the mountains. And ultimately that kind of helped us eliminate some places that we almost thought about just straight up moving to without much thought. So those are the main reasons, but it was a wild experience. I don't think I would ever do it again full time because we had 2 dogs. So it was a little tight in the van, but overall, just an amazing experience. The country is just beautiful. So we had so much fun.
How long were you on the road for?
We were probably like go for 6 months, 6.5 months. And when I say go, I mean, my wife cannot sit still, and I don't sit still very well either. But so she's like, we're on to the next, on to the next, on to the next. I think we did over 20 national parks in 6 months and hiked like 450 miles or something crazy. Flew to Hawaii for 2 weeks while we were out in California. And then after that, we went and set up 2 new Airbnbs because we had the flexibility. We could just take the van and live wherever. We set up 2 new ones in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and the next like 5 months before moving into our new house. So it worked well. Like if you want to be full-time short-term rental investor and want that flexibility, and you just want to go explore different markets to invest in, like and have fun at the same time, like it's a pretty cool way to do it. Is get a camper or something and just go.
Yeah, it just pairs so nicely. It does. It's like we did that same exact thing. I mean, we were on the road for 5 months, and that was kind of the intent as well. As we were like, one, we want to see if the systems we've set up are set up well, so we can leave them. Like I tend to be, especially at the beginning when we like really expanded our portfolio in Texas. Anytime there was a problem, I was like, okay, I want to be hands-on. I want to fix the thing. Like, let me just like go there and handle it. And Ethan was like, Sarah, let's get in the van. Let's leave it. Like you've got to be able to like trust these people with your properties. Otherwise it's always going to be a ball and chain for you. And so we got in that van and it was like, fine for 6 months. And I was like, oh my gosh, it is possible to leave it alone. Like, holy cow, let's kind of spread our wings here. But you're right. Like now that we have that van, it's one of those things where like anytime we want to move anywhere, or if like there's a surge anywhere we are living and we want to put it online for a minute, we're like, we'll just go hop in the van. Just go find a campsite for a weekend.
Yeah, that's awesome. That is true. That you got to force yourself to step outside of the operations, because our first two were local as well, so we felt the same way. But you realize that as long as you set up the right systems and team locally, you're good.
Yeah. So you ended up selling your van, and I saw yesterday Zoe Berghoff, who also has a van and does kind of the same thing where they're either in their van or they're in their Airbnb properties. She's now renting her van out as well, and it's making more money than her glamping situation. And I was like, I'm listening. So maybe, but I think you guys sold it.
Yeah, I thought so. We haven't sold it yet. We probably need to upload better photos. We had like a YouTube video in the listing, so we either need to probably come down on the pricing or just wait. So I thought about renting it on like Outdoorsy or something, but it's good to know that she's doing well on it, because I think I may end up doing that. It's summer season, so it'd be easy to rent it out, and
yeah,
have to hit her up.
Yeah, it sounds like they just started, but it sounds like she's got a time limit on it. So like she's not going to like let people rent it for like 3 days. It has to be like a week or longer rental to really make it worth her time. But I mean, she's like, so far it's been seamless. So that's definitely something. I mean, ours is a Volkswagen, and it's got a little bit more of a personality than maybe a Sprinter van does. So I don't know that ours would do as well, and it probably would come with more complaints. But definitely for a van like yours, you might look into it.
Yeah, for sure. We will have to do that.
Okay, so I have another question for you. How has your overall Airbnb strategy changed from 2019 to 2022? Because the landscape is a lot different now.
Yeah, so as we've grown, we've continued to really just focus on larger properties, because I've come to realize that it takes just about the same amount of effort to manage a big one as it does a small one once they're set up. A small one, you're probably going to have more check-in and check-outs, because smaller groups don't travel for as long a period of times typically. And then you still have to check in a guest and check them out. So a lot of that's automated, but you still have a guest in there that asks you questions. Now, can there be more things that go wrong in a bigger house? Sure, there's more parts, right, or more things. But I'd rather manage one property that cash flows $10,000 a month versus 3 that cash flow $10,000 a month. So as we've grown, we focused on that, and then diversifying across markets a little bit. And I'm glad we did this, just because when COVID hit, Nashville just slowed down drastically for like 6 to 8 months, then kind of slowly picked back up, and now is full steam ahead. The mountains, lakes, and beaches just exploded during that time. That's when we pivoted to Gatlinburg, Tennessee, and just had unreal returns. And then now we're seeing the travel pivot back to some metro areas. And a lot of the supply in Nashville is actually lower than it was pre-COVID. And in the mountains, it's up like 60% or something insane. So a lot of investors move their money there. And then we moved to Florida to kind of offset the slower season in Nashville in the mountains, which is winter. And in South Florida, the further south you go, the busier it is during the winter and spring. So we've kind of tried to level out the cash flow throughout the year and make it a little steadier, and also diversify the investments. And then, like you said, if we ever want to go visit, at least we have different places to go visit and stay. So that's kind of how our strategy has lined up.
Yeah, I love that. I remember it's got to be months ago, where Sean, I don't know his last name, I screw it up every single time I say it, but the guy who does Airbnb Automated, who's like very heavily into arbitrage, he was like stitching one of your videos suggesting that arbitrage is a better route to go because of X, Y, and Z. And although you do have like more doors and it's like maybe levels out in that way where like if one thing goes wrong here, you've got 200 over here that are doing well, so you don't feel that hit as much. Like that operation on the back end, like just in comparison to the one property I have in Michigan versus the 4 arbitrage properties I have in Texas, like I would take the one in Michigan over the 4 in Texas every single day of the week. And so for us, we've got that same mentality where it's like, look, it might cost you more on the front end and it might take longer to set up on the front end. But on the back end, if your actual goal, which whose goal isn't time freedom, but if your actual goal is time freedom, arbitrage is never going to give you that the way that big properties will. It just won't. It's the reality of it. I don't care if maybe arbitrage like has a better net underneath of you if something goes wrong. Things go wrong, but it's not so often that, you know, it's not worth pursuing that big property. So I agree with you on all fronts there.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, arbitrage is great. The cash on cash is substantially higher because there's no down payment, right? No closing costs. But the one major downside, which I think Sean actually admitted, he's a bit of a stickler whenever he does those, kind of bickers back and forth, which is fine. I mean, he's an inspiration to a lot of people to watch, and I like his content. But the downside with arbitrage is you don't get principal pay down on the loan or capital appreciation on the house long term as a hedge against inflation. So you're not building your net worth outside of you're building this business, which is great. You're building a very heavy cash flowing business. But when COVID hit, we were still cash flow positive, and he had to focus on filling 200 to 400 units or whatever. And if he was barely breaking even, which I imagine he was maybe around even during those 6 months of COVID, because a lot of his are in metro areas, he got no other benefit. Right. So if we're breaking even, at least I know that the principal. So the benefit you get with buying and holding real estate is one, you're building your net worth over time, but two, during anything like COVID, at least you're getting principal pay down on the loan if you're breaking even at best, and capital appreciation over which hedges against inflation.
1000%. I mean, I went through that too. Like I scaled up from 1 to 4 properties in Dallas, Fort Worth a week before COVID hit, right? And all of them were arbitrage. And that's a market that he's heavily invested in as well. And like all of a sudden now I have, you know, 5 rents to pay and nobody's traveling to metro markets. And I'm like, oh my God, what am I going to do? And so we did break even, like rent was paid, but there wasn't any profit and there's also no equity in the house. So, so all the way around, we were like, this is a big learning curve with no benefit attached to it.
Yeah. So there's definitely pros and cons to both strategies, but yeah, COVID was definitely an interesting learning experience, I think, for everyone across the board in the industry.
Yeah, 1000%. Okay, I have another question for you. Your current niche is luxury single-family homes. Are there plans to diversify that down the road at all? Like, do you think you'll ever get into like really unique stays or new builds or anything of that nature?
So I like the idea of new builds. The main reason is it's usually cheaper to buy and do a new build than it is to buy a furnished, ready-to-go turnkey rental once it's complete. So you kind of build in some padded equity there out of the gate, and it is really nice to have a new house that typically has less problems than one that's older, and you don't have to do rehab on it if you needed that. So that's a benefit. The only downside is you have to wait 6 to 12 months for a new build to be completed. So you just have that waiting period. I do really like the idea of unique stays. I will say our downtown condo in Nashville, which is our smallest property and probably least unique. We bought that one turnkey already furnished. We only made a couple changes. That one, we almost sold it actually, kind of in the middle of COVID because we're like, it's not really renting that well. It's like making a little bit of money. Now it's been like our top producing property, like compared to its size. I mean, it's just crushing, and just Nashville's, occupancy's through the roof. So it's kind of interesting to see that transition over the past couple of years. And I think unique stays, your return on your investment can be so substantial. So I'm interested in doing more unique stays in the future. And I don't think I want all of our properties to only be large, more on the luxury side, just because I feel like that could be harder during like a major recession to kind of keep afloat on the, float the same average daily rates, because people are going to be not as, I guess, encouraged to spend more per night at a place if their bank account or their investments are tanking. So yeah, I guess I'm open to all of the above per se.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with you. It's just that patience game. Like, you're like, oh, if we just buy a house that already exists, we can have this up and running in like 2 to 3 months. Whereas waiting 12 months for something, you're like, oh, that timeline would just, the anticipation might kill me.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I think once you reach a certain point where you're already comfortable with the cash flow and you have the time, then it may make sense. But I think if you're like starting on your first or second property, if you're like really eager to get the cash flow going, it probably doesn't make sense to do a new build in most cases.
Right. Yeah, 1000%. Well, cool. I think we're thinking about it the same way. I would love to get into new builds and unique stays down the road. Like, for me, it's like my like end goal. I feel like my biggest satisfaction would be, and I've said this probably to you and many other people, is that invisible house in Joshua Tree
Oh,
that they've got out there. Like,
yeah.
that creation, I'm just like, that is such a legacy. It's like one of those things that people will appreciate for like generations beyond you, and it's one of a kind, it's custom, it's like a once in a lifetime experience. And so, like, how excessive, but also I want it so bad.
I know that place is so wild, and they charge an absurd amount of money per night, but they get booked.
They can get it $4,000 a night. Like, damn. Okay, I've got a couple more questions for you as we kind of wrap up here. When you look at the direction of the world and where it's headed into a recession, how does it affect your strategy moving forward? And do you have any advice for hosts who are anxious?
So really, it's just about having, and I think COVID taught us this originally, is just having some type of reserves per property. I like to keep 2 to 3 months worth of mortgage and expenses in the bank account for each property. So that kind of gives us at least a little bit of comfort, and that's on top of our personal, emergency savings or whatever. Um, the interesting thing with real estate itself, the real estate prices, it does not always move in the same direction as the stock market. So 2008, 2009 was an interesting thing where there was like a mortgage crisis and the housing market tanked. That caused the entire economy to collapse. Whereas you look at the majority of other recessions, real estate does not move in the same direction. So I'm really curious to see what happens. And also with rampant inflation, real estate is a great place to plant your money because real estate is a real asset that tends to rise along with inflation, kind of hedges against it. So the flip side of the coin is, how does this affect the travel industry? I think luxury stays and ones that are more expensive to get to specific locations, I think those ones are going to be the first ones to get hit a little bit during a recession or economic downturn, because people are going to, I think, still going to want to travel, but they may just not be willing to spend as much or go, dump a ton of money into a unique experience out in the middle of nowhere. So I think it's going to, and plus it's become more competitive in a lot of markets, especially rural markets. I think I just saw on my phone when we got disconnected earlier that AirDNA had a year-over-year decline in demand in rural markets, which is interesting because I've seen that. So I think it's just about having a good strategy, making sure your pricing strategy is right, and knowing what other people are charging. Because if there's not as much demand, the last thing you want to do is try and scoop last minute bookings by tanking your prices. I think you need to adjust your pricing strategy accordingly 1 to 3 months out ahead of time to ensure that you're still filling dates and cash flow positive. I'll say it 100 times over again. With COVID, if we were cash flow positive in Metro Nashville, I know we can still break even or be cash flow positive in any other type of economic downturn. Knock on wood, but I think you can still get bookings. There's always going to be someone traveling that needs a place to stay, regardless, if you're charging $1,000 a night or if you have to reduce it to $200 a night.
Yeah. Oh, I agree. Yeah. I feel I've just like received so much anxiety from hosts in like conversations on social media over this recession, and people who are thinking about getting into Airbnb and like being ready to and not wanting to jump in. And I feel that same way. I'm like, look, we had 5 properties in downtown Dallas that were not good properties. Like, they were our very first properties. We cut corners on every corner. I'm not sure they would have been great or successful in a great market. And we still were able to pay rent every single month all the way through COVID. And so for me, walking into this, I'm like, is there even a scenario where travel would stop to that extent again? Maybe, maybe not. But even when it even if it did, we still broke even. So, and at this point, we're switching it all to mortgages. So instead of, rent. So all of a sudden, I'm like, no, we're fine. There's so much less anxiety around it. I'm so glad I had COVID first.
Yes, yeah, for sure. And I think the big message here is don't let fear drive your investments. You have to make calculated investments and don't make foolish ones, of course. But you have to understand that when I started in real estate investing, I thought the market was insanely too high. And I almost backed out of my first 2 offers. Like, I'm not paying that. And fast forward, everything's up like 50% of what I bought it from or more. And now we could tap into the equity to buy more properties. It's like, this is crazy. So whether the market's at all-time highs or all-time lows, you could still find good deals. You just have to make calculated, smart investments and think long-term. Invest for cash flow, not appreciation. Like, that's where, if the housing market tanks, house flippers are going to be the first people who get screwed because they're banking on the future sale of that property. So if it all of a sudden it's less expensive, the value goes way down, they're going to lose money and they can't sell the house. So with rentals, as long as you're cash flow positive and you're holding, thinking long-term, then you should be good.
Yeah. And for those house flippers out there, if that does tank and you just refreshed a house and it needs to put furniture in it to put it on Airbnb, let us know. You know who to call. So if we go into a recession and, house prices drop, are you going to go on a buying frenzy?
Yes. Yeah. If the housing prices tank, I will for sure figure out a way, or I will call every person I've ever met and say, hey, this is a good time to partner on a few deals together. So I think it's good to be opportunistic, but don't assume and read the fear-mongering headlines that you see every day, because there's been people predicting the worst recession in history. Will it happen? I don't know, but they've been predicting it for like 6 to 8 years. So if you waited on the sideline for 6 to 8 years, you're in the same place as you were then, probably. It's all about making calculated and smart investments.
Yeah, 1000%. Interest is just a line item. That's what we've been telling everyone here that's been complaining about the interest prices raising. We're like, look, a great deal is harder to come by. We're not going to argue with you there, but there are still so many good deals on the table that is not reason to stop.
Yeah.
So I agree on all fronts. Okay, so last question I have for you as we wrap up here is, what is your least favorite part about Airbnb investing?
Oh, this is probably the easiest question you could have. I don't like responding to and communicating with guests at all, or dealing with bad guests. People that are constantly bickering for an early check-in or a discount on their stay. When they get there, they complain about some dust they found underneath a TV stand or a bedside table. It's like a house is a house. It's not going to be perfect. If there's an issue, we can happily help resolve it or send the cleaning team out there. But when people are just ruthless and rude and expect the world from you, I cannot wait to get out of management someday. But will I forego, last year, I think, let's say if we paid a property manager 20% last year, we would have paid someone $120,000 to do what we did in like less than 2 hours a week. So when I think about it in that lens, every time I'm like, namaste, like, it's okay. Just deal with this person for a couple minutes, or deal with this damage this one time. But yeah, that's the thing I like the least about it.
Yeah, 1000%. Do you think when you think about management in the future, do you think you'll have the approach of like finding a good management company that's already set up, or do you think you'll kind of build an internal management system yourself?
So that's like the hardest battle I have internally right now. My wife really wants to just hire a few people and teach them, but then again, I'm probably going to still end up being in the operations for a long time, because I'm going to have to answer all their questions that they get asked by guests and teach them. And then whenever issues arise, they're still going to lean on me and my wife to actually go solve the problems or deal with whatever damage claim, replacing the item. So I think for that reason, I would like to broker a deal with an excellent property management company that's not like a legacy, just like you're just throwing one in the hat of a million properties they have and they don't do a good job managing them. If I can find a couple of those, that would be ideal. And then I can help promote their brand too, to kind of like on social media. So I think it could be like a win-win situation. So I don't really know for sure yet.
Yeah. Well, for those property managers out there, go knock at his door.
Yeah.
Well, beautiful. Well, those are all the questions that I have for you. And I feel like this has been a super helpful podcast for a lot of people who are panicky, especially in today's market. So thank you for all of the tidbits of information. Before we let you go, why don't you go ahead and plug yourself so everybody knows where to find you?
Yeah, you can find me really on Instagram or TikTok. It's Elefante6, Michael Elefante. So say hi. I'll usually respond.
Beautiful. And he has a course and all sorts of other tools that you can take advantage of. If you are looking for Emily and I anywhere else, we are at Superhost Labs on literally everything, and also at the Carwells on literally everything. So, well, thank you again so much for coming on, and thank you to our listeners for joining us again. We will catch you next time. Bye.